Part-Time Hitter is brought to you by Friendly Forces, a 501c3 nonprofit committed to helping reserve component members seamlessly integrate their military service with rewarding civilian careers. We connect them with employers who value their unique skills and critical role in national security and advise organizations how to become more reservist-friendly. Check them out at www.friendlyforces.org. Friendly Forces is also brought to you by the Fratty Guard, a lifestyle brand for part-time hitters. Check them out at www.thefrattyguard.com and on Instagram at @thefrattyguard. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Part-Time Hitter podcast. Today, I am joined by Captain Brandon Krehling. Brandon is a current Civil Affairs Team Chief in the 450th Civil Affairs Battalion Airborne and a consultant at Slalom Consulting. I first met Brandon at Airborne School and have been privileged to watch him grow into an inspirational leader and a proficient civil affairs operator ever since. So my first question to you, Brandon, is do you ever wish your name was Braden instead of Brandon?
No, I can't say I've ever given that any thought. Why Braden over Brandon?
I just feel like Braden's kind of a hotter name these days. It was just a question.
Probably.
So let me get to my real question.
Okay.
What are you running these days?
What am I running? Well, we talked about this beforehand, but we've got the Slick Gorilla. I don't know how well you can see that. Kind of hair powder. So it's like your tight hold like pomade, and it does like volume and shit to your hair, and you just throw it in, and yeah, for us,
keeps it dry.
It keeps it like, well, not even like dry, but it like allows you to like style it without it being like getting like greasy. So if you have like naturally greasy hair, like you like sweat a lot and your hair just gets like oily fast, and you want to shampoo it every day, that stuff's like pretty good just to like hold your hair straight.
Smell?
I don't think it really smells at all.
What's it
smells
called?
like freedom.
Black Gorilla?
No, it's Slick Gorilla. I know
Slick Gorilla.
Slick Gorilla, yeah. I think I got it off like Amazon. I don't remember how much it was, but I've literally I got like a 2-pack 3 years ago, like right before my wedding. My hair looks fire in those pictures, but I've literally
have our post-production team get those pictures to share on the YouTube channel just so we can confirm that. But okay. That's good to know. I always like to know what the hot hair products are. So thank you for sharing that. So Brandon, let's talk a little about your military background. I know that you're not what I like to call a pure breed part-timer because you started out on active duty doing whatever it is they do. I don't really know what they do.
We don't either.
Tell me, what is it you did on active duty before joining the reserve?
Yeah. So short story is I was a transportation officer, so went into kind of the Logie branches and did kind of my PLXO time in that realm. I got out after 4 years, so I mean, it was a pretty quick stint. I did like it as my lieutenant time, but longer story to that is like a longer journey to like even get into the military, but yeah, transportation.
So let's start there then. How did you wind up in the Army? I think you did ROTC. Not totally sure.
Yeah, so
what drove that decision?
The long end of the story, it basically started like when I was probably like 13-ish, and I like remember it like very clearly, like when I first like wanted to join. So my family was on vacation at like in like Ocean City, Maryland, because we were like, I don't know, we just went to Ocean City, Maryland every year. If you like live on the East Coast long enough, like people secrets, yeah. I mean, I was 13 at the time, so I was a little bit old for secrets at that point, but I've been there once or twice. But no, so like essentially I remember this like very clearly. Like I was with my mom and my younger brother, and we were like on the boardwalk, and like, you know, this was 2008. So like basically the height of the first surge and like people, you know, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And there was this like Army recruiting, not even like a booth. It was like this full on tent that they had set up with like the classic logo. And you would like go inside, and they had like that Humvee simulator where you'd like jump inside and like be the gunner or like the driver with 4 other teenagers.
You gotta remember that, which was so crazy because people were getting blown up like every day at that stage of the war. And it's just like, how can we...
Well, it's like, kids obviously, like looking back on it now, I'm like, I can't believe like they let me do that. But like the age limit was 13, and I had like literally, I think weeks before just turned 13. So they were like, you want to come in and like shoot the 50 cal? That sounds sweet. So, I mean, prior to that, I think that the military to me, it always seemed like kind of an option. Like I always thought it was cool. I've been playing like freaking airsoft like since I was like 9. So I don't know. But like I remember like very vividly like that moment, like doing that. And it kind of sparked this like interest I had. And so coming out of this Army booth, I'm 13 years old. And, you know, the first thing that comes out of my teenage mouth, and I think the mouth of like every other like white middle class teenage boy is, I'm going to join the Marines. Yeah. As happens, right? So it was from there, like I went on to high school, and like my high school where I lived had it was in central Pennsylvania, had a junior ROTC program. And that was like kind of a big turning point for me. And like, you know, people throw around like the JROTC Nazi kids. I was totally one of those kids. Thought it was like awesome to like walk around in a uniform on Wednesdays, which in like hindsight, it isn't. It isn't, but I would say what it did for me at that point in my life was it definitely give me some like stability and structure, because it was right around the same time my parents got divorced. And so I definitely had like similar minded people I was around. And so I made a ton of friends who, many of which like I still talk to nowadays. Like there's people I went to high school with who I'll like still text, and like hanging out with a guy this weekend that I've known like since that point.
Since your time in the trenches of JROTC.
Yeah, in the hallways. Like if you weren't there, like you don't know what it was like.
You don't know, man.
It would. No, but like, so it was really influential in a lot of ways. One being because I had this like notion, like from the time I was like a freshman in high school, that like, I'm going to go and like join the Marines, enlist, and go be a rah-rah, or, you know, whatever, like fully drinking like the Kool-Aid as a teenager. But the instructor, he's a retired lieutenant colonel. I actually just emailed him like a couple months ago, just following up and him like asking how I was doing. He had been the professor of military science at Shippensburg University, which unironically is like where I ended up going to school. But he was the one who kind of like took me under his wing and mentored me in a lot of ways, like physically, mentally, prompted me to like get into sports, prompted me to start running, prompted me to just find my passion in things. And so that was like super influential. In a lot of ways, I wanted to like emulate that one day and like be that for someone else. So that was like the initial drive. And so when he told me like I should definitely go and try and get a scholarship and go to school and apply for West Point and do all that stuff, I was full in from that point on. So
did you apply to West Point?
I applied. I never really went anywhere, but I did apply. But I did apply for Army like 4-year ROTC scholarship they do every year. So it's like the national scholarship. They hand out like 3 and 4-year scholarships every year to, you know, like graduating seniors. And so like my entire premise of going to college was kind of riding on that, like getting something that would help pay for it. And I like clearly remember September 2013, October 2013, the government shut down. I had applied super early because like I knew where I was going to school. I knew what I wanted to do. It wasn't Shippensburg. It was like University of Pittsburgh. Right after the shutdown ended, I remember the school had like called me and been like, hey, so we can offer you a 3-year scholarship. And I'm like, that's great. How about like the 4th year? And they said, well, maybe not, friend. How's 3 sound? And I said, we'll see. But I mentioned,
how about 3.5?
How about 3.5? Yeah, not a bargain, right?
How
about 5? Let's, you know, I go up and, you know, they meet me in the middle, right? No, so like I talked to my instructor who was also in contact with the current kind of professor of military science at Shippensburg. And so he helped me set up an interview with that guy who I went and talked to. And like a week or 2 after, I got a call from him who was like, hey, you know, you have this 3-year national scholarship. We can actually give you a 4th year, like a line scholarship that'll cover like all 4 years of school. And so like, you know,
I think that those programs, I mean, they have ones that are also like specific to the National Guard. And I think the Reserve, I forget what they're called, like Minuteman scholarships or something, where you agree to join the Guard Reserve. But to get college like fully paid for it, not even having to like go active duty, sounds like a pretty amazing deal. And I don't know why more people don't do it. But also at that time, so what year was that? Like 20?
So that was like 2013, 2014.
So I think around that time, actually, to your point, when I was coming out of college, I was looking at the Marines too. I was looking at their like PLC and whatever their like summer OCS like program is.
Yeah, I had a roommate who did that in college. Yeah.
Everybody like starts with the Marines, and then most of us end up like deciding on the Army or Air Force.
Yeah.
But during that time, that was like 2009, 2010, they were going through a drawdown. So obviously like your timing of when you're looking to get that scholarship or join. Like a lot of it has to do with how badly, obviously, the military needs people at that time. But obviously, you were able to get ultimately like a 4-year full ride, did you say, through ROTC?
Yeah. So it ended up being a full ride, which like stepping before even, graduating high school, like that's obviously like a huge deal. And, I was super thankful for like all I had kind of gotten. Again, the JROTC memes are hilarious, but I'm like, like always in the back of my mind, if I like make a meme like that or I see one, I really do owe a lot to that kind of program. And I think there's a lot of kids out there who probably benefit from having that structure.
Yeah, I saw that the Army, I think the number of JROTC programs nationwide has gone like way, way down over the years. I think the last I saw, they wanted to start trying to expand it again. But my concern with that would be, like, this is the way I would feel if I went to West Point or the Naval Academy. After 4 years of kind of being in the military without even technically, after 4 years at West Point, you graduate and you commission, and now it's like your first day in the real military, even though you've kind of already been in like a very intense, like shitty version of the military for 4 years, and now you're just starting. So my concern would be kids doing JROTC, would that kind of turn them off from joining the military or going to ROTC later on?
I would basically look at it this way. I think it only turns off the kids who probably shouldn't
have been
go that route for the most part. And that's not like entirely true, but like I think that, you get some sense of like what it is, especially if you come from like a background where you don't have any like military figures in your life or anyone who's in that realm. Like it at least helps you learn more about it. It's a 40-minute class every couple of days in high school. So I wouldn't say it has like the same rigor as burning people out at West Point, or like you're not getting hazed in high school.
Are there like elite organizations within the JROTC community that are sort of like the soft of JROTC?
So it's funny you say that, because
like
they have
Ranger
like
Challenge, Junior Ranger thing.
There is, and my school actually like had it, and like later on when I went to college, I like helped out with this. They called it the Raider Challenge because we were.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so it's funny because it's like I honestly kind of enjoyed it because you like learned about like land nav, and like there was like a PT test, and like I would say the biggest thing that did for me was help me learn how to like game the APFT, because like by the time I was graduating, I'd won like the top physical fitness award for like freaking like that challenge or whatever. And then like when I got to like college, our program was like the one sponsoring and helping out with like that same thing. It was like, funny to be on the other end of it.
Do you learn like hospital corners and basic military stuff?
No, I'm trying to remember. It's been over like 10 years at this point, but it was like you do like an APFT in the morning, and then you would go straight into like a round robin of events, like a one rope bridge. So like your team has to like work together to like cross a creek, and then you have a first aid kind of course. And so like different people are given different scenarios: how to treat for shock, how to treat for CPR, which I have like this really wild story, but we don't have to get into that now about that. And
dude, I actually think it would be a really funny like movie premise if like war broke out and somehow like the entire military was like killed, and the only unit left was like a JROTC squad that like had to win the day for America.
I think we can get funding and like make that movie. And like
I have some contacts in Hollywood. I'll make some calls.
Yeah, but like all the high schools need to be like really buff, mid to
well, because they're going to be played by like 28-year-olds, but they're playing like 14-year-olds.
Yeah, of course.
It'll be like Channing Tatum.
Honestly, I would watch that.
So, having never been in the regular Army in a garrison environment, I always kind of wondered, because there's so much, even during drills and when I've been on active duty, there's so much time. You're always somehow busy, but you're somehow working all the time, but like there's not always that much to do. And I always wondered, like, what is most of your time as like maybe as a transportation officer? You guys were probably doing a lot of vehicle maintenance or probably missions, just transporting things around the base. But what would you say you did here?
That's a great question. I think I ask myself that like every day. So I graduated transportation BOLIC, and my first duty station was legit right down the road at Fort Eustis, Virginia, which is like an hour from Fort Lee. So I got there, and the first unit I was put in was a movement control team, which is like a pretty like small element type of unit. There's only 21 people in the entire company. And I know they were like talking about changing the MTO at one point to like have like warrants and like less lieutenants, but like I personally think it's like the worst place like a brand new second lieutenant can go. Like it is not, that should not ever be your first stop.
Was it mostly just like 88 mics and lodge
It was
stations?
it was all 88 Novembers. We had one guy who was like a hotel, but like he was there like more as he wasn't like slotted correctly, but he had like done November type work. So I show up to that unit and I'm kind of like, what the fuck is this? Like, because I think it, like most places like can kind of tell you the same gist for how active duty works. You get up, like, let's say like Monday morning, you go to PT starts at 6 or 6:30 in most places. You PT for an hour, do your PRT drills, and you're just there like, what am I doing?
Why did I sign up for this? Yeah.
Doing your 3-mile run or whatever at like an excruciating slow pace. And then you're like, you're the lieutenant running with your guy in the back to try to motivate.
Some guy who absolutely does not care about being there and doesn't give a
Yeah. And then, you get done with PT in the morning. We had these like costs that we worked out of. And if it was Monday, we'd have to like walk down to the motor pool. And like, I just remember like our motor pool was like a 3/4 mile walk to get down for like from our cough. And they had parking down there, but like the BC had put out like, oh, you everyone walks down here, you don't park. So like everyone's walking down this like very busy road to get to. Oh yeah, except for him. Yeah, I think he had like a van or something. He took.
Probably had a golf cart.
No, it was a minivan. I remember that very clearly. There was a minivan. And then you're like in the murder pool, like some sort of like battalion formation. And it was like, go PMCS your vehicles. And it's like, this one's deadline. This one's also deadline. And like, it's always funny to me when people like shit on like stuff in the reserves. Cause at least in our unit, things get taken care of for the most part. Like there might be a few deadlines, but the stuff we have works way better than like the stuff I had on active duty.
Which is like kind of unfathomable.
It really is. And I like, that's more on like the acquisition side and like the maintenance side of things, probably because we have contractors working on our stuff rather than 19-year-old dudes who like aren't really sure like what side of a wrench they're supposed to use. So
yeah, but in theory, you have a whole team of like mechanics who's there like full time, right, to be like fixing vehicles and stuff if it's not, operator level stuff.
Yeah,
and
in theory.
And I guess it's always like, oh, well, we have to order this part, and that part's been on order for like 10 months.
It's the same way on active duty. It's literally the same way. And so like if you're like an officer, you'll go to like maintenance meetings and you'll say, hey, the part's on back order, and your XO will yell at you like it's your fault. Why don't you go to freaking,
figure it out, Lieutenant,
and get the part? Like, why are we waiting on it? It's a lot of just like,
that sounds amazing.
It really is. It's wonderful. And I could sell that, like it's the back of my hand.
Yeah,
I sell it today. You go home at like 1900 because you're never going home at 17, because no matter how little you have going on throughout the day, something will pop up at 16:45, and now you've got to stay for another 2 hours to finish it.
Yeah, I never understood that mentality, and we see it to some respect in the Guard and Reserve as well, but especially on just like if you really have nothing to do, and even if something pops up, it's like there's probably like 4 people that need to work on that particular thing, but you're gonna hold like the whole platoon or whole company or whole battalion to like until it's done. It's like just
well, and like I definitely like took a lot from that. And so like the next student I was in, I like tried to like make some of those lessons work, because it's like, if you're the leader, you're expected to stay like with the troops. But if it's like 3 guys like working on something, there's other things you can do, right? Like if your commander gives you the leeway to be like, hey guys, you're going to be, here kind of late working on this, but once you're done, don't worry about showing up until like noon or 1 o'clock tomorrow. It doesn't have to be like every single person here has to stay until this is finished. And then guess what? We're going to show up at normal time tomorrow, because that's just how we roll, because Army.
Tonight.
Yeah, fight tonight. With 2 hours.
So you're a transpo PL type for a minute, and then I believe you were was it AIT company commander later on?
Yeah, so that story is kind of funny, and just like filling in the gaps there. So like, I was in that kind of MCT, like it's not really an XO. They call it like mobility officer, like movement control officer, but you're doing like PL and like XO type work. It just so happens that like your company is super tiny. And like, so, my first year in the like Army and active duty, that's basically what we're doing. And I think in like early 2019, we found out that like our unit was slated to replace another MCT in Vicenza, Italy, and take over this kind of AFRICOM mission that was going on. And so we left in like late September of 2019, and we're there until like basically the beginning of July or August of 2020. I can't remember the exact dates, but it was cool. One of my other buddies from another MCT ended up like coming into the unit with me. So he went over. I mean, we had a great time there for the first like 4 or 5 months. It was like, sending your soldiers out, which you like don't typically have much to do back home, to these cool places in Africa where they're like collecting all this per diem, doing like their actual job, then getting to do things like we're back in Italy with like our command team, and we had a less than like ideal relationship with him, but like it didn't matter because in Italy, you work your 5 days and then time off, you get to go like explore the country or like,
Did you have enough freedom to do that? Because I know like there's these like rigorous processes on military where it's like you have to put in like maybe not as an officer so much, but like your leave, and you have to like come up with a whole plan for like where you're going and where you're going to be at these times. Like, did you have to do all that if you wanted to go to Germany?
Not really. So like we did have like a pretty good understanding and like relationship with like our whole unit that like, hey, as long as you're not going like more than like 250 miles, like kind of the standard, like Army radius or travel outside of like where we were.
Which everyone ignores.
Well,
no comment.
No comment there. But, at the end of the day, like I think for the most part, most of our soldiers, like they like weirdly did not like want to go that many places. Like they didn't like want to travel that much. They were just like,
I hear that a lot where it's like people like waste, their time overseas. Like, yeah, I'm just staying in and like playing video games. It's like, you're probably not going to get this chance again once you're out.
Well, and honestly, I like really enjoy working with like these super professional folks like within AFRICOM. I had the opportunity to like go to Africa like on a couple occasions, and it was like a really cool experience. Like just, very like world broadening, like getting to see like different countries and like third world places that, you like normally don't get to see if you're just like traveling. So cool experience. I get to help out with this like conference in Ethiopia, which was pretty cool because like we had all these like high ranking generals come in from like different countries in Africa, and all their partner force generals who were like National Guardsmen and reservists. And that was neat. And then like that was right before COVID happened. And then COVID happened, and we're like stuck in our rooms for X amount of months, basically not doing anything.
Yeah. So were you literally just like in your hotel once that happened? Like you weren't allowed to do
like the timeline for like how stuff went down, because if you recall way back then, it was Italy that kind of got hit before the US in terms of like the massive impact. So I was at that same conference in Ethiopia in February of 2020, and we got back like February 25th into Venice. And like, it was like the very next day or like 2 days after that they like shut down all traffic, like in and out of like the airports. And it's like kind of funny to think, it's like, man, I could have gotten stuck down in like the country for, 4 or 5 months, which we did have happen to like some of our folks. Like one of our NCOs was down in Niger for 4 months, and he was a former infantry guy, so like he didn't care. He's like, this is chill, like I'm good. And like they were making a ton of money while they were there too, just in per diem, which is like awesome. So like they're like, keep us down here longer.
I'd still rather be in a hotel room in Vicenza, I think, than in like
definitely
Chad.
Yeah, like tent city kind of stuff. No, so it was, from my perspective, it was like just, stuck in a hotel, just like everyone else, a couple months. And then like by the time we were getting ready to leave, things had like opened back up for the most part, just the mask era of COVID where everyone's just walking around and like doing their normal day-to-day business, but like a mask on. But so, we get back from, that kind of rotation, and, my buddy who had gone there with me had gotten orders to give me a basic training PL. And at that point, I'd been like in the movement control team for like 2 years, and I just wanted out. I just wanted to experience something new. I'd worked for like 2 different commanders, and I was like, please, like anything else at this point, like anything.
Actually, by the way, what did you preference transportation, or were you kind of like given that, or what?
I'm somewhat given somewhat like preference. I had decided, I think my junior year, I'd like gone into college, like I'd said like, oh, like infantry this, infantry that, but I like truthfully didn't know like what I wanted to do. And I think at a certain point I was like, I don't know if like the combat arms like lifestyle is kind of for me. So at that point, like in school, like my wife and I were getting more serious, like dating. And so I like preferenced something that was I thought, like a little less like army-ish in a sense. And I was also thinking at that point, like about transitioning anyway. So I picked something that I thought I could like get a job in once I was done. So
being a driver for FedEx, which by the way, they are paying.
they pay well, man. Yeah. Like working in an Amazon warehouse, which like contrary to popular belief, I'm like glad like things went the way they did. And I do not work in that industry. Props to people who do. Just that's just a really like kind of hard lifestyle if you're like in like a warehouse and doing those kind of operations.
I couldn't do it because it's I would think it would be a pretty stressful, like mentally taxing position, like logistics, anything like that. I always felt so bad for the logistics officer or Warren who was in charge of like our food and fuel and all that stuff. I'm like, oh my God, I'm glad that isn't my job.
It pays super well, and like I think it is good stuff to learn, and like I will say, like, even nowadays, like, thinking logistically has helped me in a lot of other areas of my life, like, where before I was just like, let's do it live. So, but at the end of the day, like, it's forever career, not for me. It takes, like, you have to be very dedicated to that, like, craft. And it is, like, definitely, like, a skill to be, like, relatively good at that kind of planning. And jumping back, I think I was... saying so, like, we come back from Italy. My buddy had called me, and he had been an XO at this AIT company that was also on Eustis for some 88 series soldiers for like almost 2 years. Like since we had got there, he was in my bullet class, and he was like, "Do you want to switch?"
Correct me if I'm wrong, but are those like? Because those are like relatively new positions. They didn't used to have basic training. I think they have basic training PLs now.
They do. Yeah, they have like basic training PLs. I think like the whole like XO position, I don't know how long that's been around, but like they had another guy who was there who was like acting as the PL, but they had like no official spot for him. I know like the drill sergeants were only like recently brought back as 2017, 2018 timeframe. So like in AIT, a soldier finishes basic, they go to AIT, and it used to be just like a platoon sergeant.
Right.
Yeah. Just sergeant instructors, but then like I guess there was like complaints about like their discipline and so they all these positions for drill sergeants to come back.
Are those positions like basic training, AIT, company commander, or XO? Are those like kind of generally people who is that like where careers go to die on active duty, or for people who are like getting out type thing?
I don't know if it's like a hard and fast rule, because there were like I will say like the commander I had when I first showed up like was kind of fell into that category, but I think it.
Oh yeah, I think you told me a story about him.
Well, yeah, and I'll get into that without like naming names or anything, but like for the most part, I think it is where people who like generally are ready to transition, and like I was at the point when my buddy called me and said like, "Hey, do you want to like see if we can do like a swap basically?" Where I knew like I was getting out at the 4-year mark. For active duty. And I wasn't even sure about the Guard of Reserves at that point. I was just like, like this has been fine, but I just don't think it's for me, like career wise. And so I took that with like the full intent of, I'm going to do this. I'm going to like transition out of active duty from here and like try to go like the career shows program, hiring our heroes route. Like I had that planned like a couple of years in advance at that point, and was like, that's what's going to happen. But I show up to like take over this XO position, and I'm there for like a month with this new commander who like, he was fine. Like I didn't see a problem with him. And one morning I showed up and he wasn't there. And the first sergeant kind of called me and was like, "Hey, congratulations, Commander." And I was like, "What is going on?" And he's like, "Well, it turns out Captain so-and-so was having some, he like showed me some text messages that had been sent in by recently graduated AIT private, female type. And so this captain who had like 3 kids and a wife had just, decided that he wanted some, extra alone time with this AIT private. And there was a whole investigation that like basically took place. It was super awkward, but like basically he showed up to work, and then like a couple of the field grades or our battalion like called in, like sent in a couple of field grades to like basically escort him away and like let him know that he's on probation. And I never saw him again.
Is that like if he's found guilty, is that like you're going to Fort Leavenworth type thing, or?
So the situation, from what I recall, it hadn't gotten to the point where it was like fully physical. They were just at the talking stage about it, basically.
I don't know how this happens. You hear these stories all the time, and it's like you hear a lot about it from like the drill sergeants, which is one thing, but then to be like the company commander and getting involved in that, it's like, because there's so many briefs, so many things about don't do this, don't do that. And then
it's moronic too. And like, it's like, honestly, with the people I worked with, it is impressive that that guy was able to keep it under wraps. Like that he was able to like do that. So like behind scenes, because like our drill sergeants that we have were really good. And so like the fact that they didn't catch on to that, like I didn't catch on to it. Like this guy would like show up at like 10 a.m. and like leave at 4, and you're just like, huh, didn't, you know, normal like company can like shit bag company commander type. You know, so like told like by my battalion commander when all this happened, like, hey, you're probably going to be in this position for a while, so get comfortable. So I like fully like kind of owned it. Like at that point, like I like dove in, like I'd show up every morning at 4:30 and like wouldn't go home until like the soldiers got back from like dinner chow and at like 1830 or 1900.
But
so
how much does a company commander for an AIT company, how much work can there really be? I mean, your XO is probably doing most of it.
During the day, there isn't that much. And at like that point, I didn't really have like an XO. So it was just me like kind of filling in for a lot of these positions. Day to day, it's like not that much work. A lot of your tasks as a company commander revolve around, you know, dealing with like soldier issues. And because they're at the schoolhouse, like from like 9 to 5, basically, all of your opportunity to like talk to them and like address those issues basically happens after that time period. So like throughout the day, you know, like we had a pretty good system where like there was like one drill sergeant in the building, like answering the phones. There was one kind of going around with the classes, like making sure that like, you know, everything was okay. But we had like 10 drill sergeants. One always had to be on duty all hours of the day. And if like they weren't on duty and they didn't have a class, I was like, take your time, because this is like a job that like I can definitely see burning you out. Because for them, it's like 7 days a week, right? So like I come in, I'm like there throughout the day, but like, you know, one of them is there like pulling duty. And so like my first sergeant would like come in, sometimes like check on them, or like I would come in on a Saturday and Sunday and like, you know, see how they were doing like on duty. So it's not like all the person, but it's just very long.
I have a buddy, and I'm gonna have him on the podcast soon, but he's currently in school. He's at a reclass, and so they're sending him to AIT. It's a long school. He's still there. He's an E7, and I guess they haven't quite figured out how to deal with the AIT privates and then the reclasses. So
yeah,
he said, like, as an E7, he has like, and this guy's deployed before. He has badges, been in a while, so he has like E6 drill sergeants like making him march around and like yelling at him and stuff, and he's just like, this is the most ridiculous thing.
I remember we had like an E7 come through, and he was like a reclass, and it was like the same situation, and it was like, you know, he outranked most of the drill sergeants, but he was like super professional, really good guy. And like we had like a couple of those, and like most of the time they're like they know the game, they're just there to play it.
Okay, so you did that, did the basic training kind of, or AIT acting company commander thing, and then you're getting out. So let's talk a little about your transition, sort of how you managed, or, you know, what you did as you were coming up on leaving the active duty Army, and what you were thinking career-wise, what that looks like. And then we can talk about how you ended up joining the reserve.
Yeah. So I had learned of like the whole Hiring Our Heroes program from a couple of other friends who had gone through it already. And I had a friend, she had gone through it in like early 2021. And I was like getting basically live updates from her as to how it was going, because I was going to be basically getting out the year after her. And so like I knew like very well in advance, like when my timeline needed to be to like get that cohort, who I needed to talk to, like what I needed to have in place. So I would say like by April of like 2021, like a full 16 months before like I officially transitioned, like I had like all my paperwork submitted for, there's like 3 different memos you need for like Hiring Our Heroes. I had like my refrad packet together. I had that already submitted. I got it back like a couple weeks after I submitted it. And, I had, the Army's like, whatever, like you want to get out. My like battalion and brigade commanders were all like pretty supportive. It was weird because like we were an active duty battalion that was like under this reserve training brigade that was stationed at Fort Lee. So when I approached my brigade commander and was like, yeah, I want to go reserves, he just like was like, thumbs up.
Hell yeah, brother.
Hell yeah, brother. Like, what can I do? And for a little bit, he was like trying to get me to like join his like brigade, and that kind of like fizzled out. And it was like eventually like,
Well, you wanted to be a pipe hitter, but we'll get into that later on.
We'll get into that, yeah. But so I had all this like paperwork together. My cohort for Hiring Our Heroes, they run it 4 times a year. It started in, I guess it was basically like September, October timeframe of 2021. At that point, I was still thinking that I was going to end up in some sort of logistics or supply chain management type position as I was getting out. I really didn't I didn't have like any like advanced degree. My undergraduate degree, if I never mentioned this, was in history. So like nothing to do with like supply chain or program management.
Sure.
But like knowing other people who had like kind of been on the same path and like had like similar degrees got into like these corporate jobs, I like wasn't super worried, but like I was, I took it seriously. So I did the prep interviews that like, I want to say it's Candorful, the online company that does like interview prep for veterans. So like you meet with, they're like volunteers. You can like practice your interviews with them and you can like kind of, they'll give you feedback on like how you did and like what to do better. That was useful as someone who like never been in like a professional interview before. I did that. I like did like any tip I could get on like upgrading my resume. I took it and like tried to incorporate it. And the way Hiring Our Heroes works is you join this cohort and at a certain point, they basically send your resumes and they blast them out to all these different companies that are participating for that time frame, like during the year. So like I interviewed with like, I think it was like 12 different companies over the course of like a month. And they were offers from places, I interviewed with like Deloitte. I interviewed with Slalom, who's like my current employer. I interviewed with like a construction company. I interviewed with, it was a couple different like legit like warehousing jobs for like Chewy, the pet supply company. Yeah. And I want to say it was NFI, which is like another big trucking company. And the interviews like always ranged from like, to like, ooh, that went really bad. Like it wasn't until like, I think an interview with Slalom that I had an interview that I was like, that was a really good interview. Like it felt like really easy. I think I based my decision to like jump from like logistics to program management basically off of that single interview. I was like, I can learn how to do that like with like no prior experience.
Being an officer is basically just project program management anyway. So.
Well, and so that's where like, I think the conversation started, right? Because like I started to learn that any sort of like project management type role is super similar to being an officer at like an XO or, some sort of staff position. Started like, researching like what it actually takes to like be a project manager. I was like, I do half the shit already. Like, yeah, it's not for like the Army. I'm not getting a water buffalo refill, but how hard can it be to make the transition? So I went in, I got an offer to like from like 2 different locations. One was for Chewy, one was for like Slalom. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to like take the plunge and like do this thing that like I have no prior experience in and see how it goes. So I started my fellowship with Slalom, which is headquartered in Seattle, but like, and it's changed a lot over the past few years, but like we have an office that's in the DC area. My wife's family lives about an hour from DC. So for the time frame that I started my fellowship, we moved in with her parents, like literally just moving in their basement.
What's a fellowship? Like an internship?
Yeah, I mean, fellowship, internship, I basically think it's interchangeable.
So you're still on active duty.
Still on active.
You're like working for the company.
You're working for this company. It's like 4 days a week. I don't know if it's really changed that much, like process wise for Hiring Our Heroes, but I'm working for Slalom Monday through Thursday, and then on Friday you have these like internal Hiring Our Heroes calls. And I'm going to be completely honest, like by like the 3rd week, I stopped attending those because it was like the same classes over and over again. It was, how to negotiate a salary, which is like a great class to have. But like when you're on like your 4th iteration of it, it's like, all right, like how many different times, like, can you tell me to like do something? And
how much money do you make right now?
Like money wise, I'd say like between the reserves and like my salary, like all put together, it's like close. So
okay. I didn't expect you to actually answer that, so we can bleep that out if you want.
Yeah, you want to bleep that out.
Okay. Sorry, I cut you off though. So you ended up basically you did the fellowship, and I guess at the end they have the option to like extend you a full-time offer once you get out or not.
Yeah. So like the goal is Hire Our Heroes only wants to like take on companies that like basically have a position open for you at the end. And like, not every company does that, but like for the most part, it's supposed to be that like if a company takes you on as a fellow, they have to at least consider you.
Right.
Right. And like, I think that makes sense. Like, you don't want a company to take you on that doesn't have the space to hire you. That's like, honestly, like,
Come on, they just want some free labor for.
yeah, I get it. Like, you're training this person to like, go into this industry, but it's kind of sleazy, right? Like, Solomon was on.
What did you actually do? Like, were you just like updating fonts on slide decks, or like, because what are they really having you do as like a fellow?
Well, and so that's where it gets complicated because like I was the first fellow within, and I'm still the only fellow that's gone through like kind of the federal process, that kind of world. And because like the rules for like federal contracting, like are like kind of weird, they can't staff an intern or a fellow onto a project. So I was brought on and they were super transparent about it. They were like, by week 8, like, we're going to let you know, like, if we want to take you or not. It's a 12-week fellowship. So they would let me know like a full month in advance before it's over, whether they're going to take me or rather than like kick rocks or whatever. But they also let me know that like, hey, because of like the way things are, we're going to have you like work on some like internal initiatives so you can like learn about the business, but we're not really going to be able to get you staffed on a project, like, if that's cool. And I'm like, bet, like, I just, give me a chance. And so I was working with like our internal like business advisory team on like some contracting stuff. Like, I kind of learned how like the bidding world worked and how you actually go after work as like a government contractor, which is really valuable information, like researching like, different competitors and kind of doing that high level analysis.
Did you have a clearance coming off of active duty? Did you need
I
one?
did. I still had a secret clearance. So like every active duty officer has, I think every officer has a secret clearance at minimum. I could be wrong about that, but I think everyone has to have like at least a secret clearance. But regardless, the work that we were doing required a public trust clearance. And so that's the thing, like, I try to like let people know. It's like, oh, I have a TS, like I can go work in this job or like get in this contracting firm. And it's like, well, kind of like really maybe, but like most places in the government don't require, there's 320 something agencies within the federal government. Not all of them require you to have like a DoD TS clearance. A lot of them just need like a public trust or something that, is relatively much easier to get. And so like most places are going to like look at that on their resume and be like, cool, like that doesn't, like, for this contract, you don't need it. So like, I don't know what you want. Cool story, bro. So like, it's very dependent on like the agency you're going to work for.
So what do you do? What would you say you do in your current position?
So I've been on the same contract with the FDIC for 2 years at this point, essentially. So, week 8 of my fellowship, they let me know, hey, you're going to be on this project. And like, I spent the next 4 weeks doing some like other internal stuff. And they let me know even before I left to like, because I had to go back to Eustis and do like out processing for like a week, what contract I was going to be slated on. And it was with the FDIC. And so like, I've done a lot of different things since I've been here. Most of my projects are like your typical project management type work, communications, working with stakeholders. There's like been some like migrations that we've done, some cybersecurity initiatives, which I know like we've talked about before. I don't know how much detail I'm maybe not allowed to go into in that, but so it varies. And I think that's like the same for any corporate job. It's like, someone asks you what you do. It's kind of like,
I always struggle. I think when we were even talking about my position, I didn't even quite know how to say what exactly I do day to day. And especially in other positions I've had where it's like, what do I actually do?
And I hate to use the term Swiss Army knife because it's such like an overused, like field grade freaking, like you hear that so you got to be a Swiss Army knife on like everything. But it's like project management, I feel like is kind of that way because like you have like this set responsibility of like making sure something happens, but like the way you go about it is different each time.
Yeah, I think especially in contracting / consulting, just being like an intelligent person who can be proactive and influence other people to do things, pretty much all you need to be successful, like any position within that world. And what sucks is that when you're looking at these job descriptions and companies are hiring, they're like, oh, you need to have like this super precise like experience doing this. And it's like, no, I don't. I can learn that in 1 day or 15 minutes. Like what you really want is just a smart person who can figure stuff out and make things happen. And it's unfortunate that companies don't always like see it that way. They'll take like the dumb sort of shitbag who has like the right words on their resume over Some
Yeah.
young kid coming out of the Army, trying to grind, trying to move on up in the world.
Well, and like, I've definitely noticed like there are times where I like have definitely called on like previous experience, like stuff I learned in the Army to like make sure something gets done or like make sure like something's resourced. And so like from that perspective, I'm like, oh yeah, like anyone who's like been an officer, like I think can step into like a program management role, because it was also like I was doing this to figure out like if this is something I want to do like as a professional career. And like, now 2 years in, I'm like, yeah, I can definitely like see myself in this role for a longer period of time. And I've definitely learned a lot. Like I've made mistakes along the way, just like anyone who, gets into work, their font's the wrong color, you misaligned a box. It's like the same stuff like most lieutenants go through when they're like learning about con ops.
So how far into the or off active duty or into the position were you when you decided to join the world of reserve special operations within the civil affairs community?
Right away. So the event before 2020, I can like confidently say like my plans changed a lot. At first I was like, yeah, I'm going to stay in for like 10 years. And then it was like 6 years. And it was like, oh, I'll do company command and like get out. And then like eventually it was like, yeah, 4 years and like National Guard. I'm going straight to that. Then 2020 happened. And I had a lot of friends who were like in the Northeast in different guard units. And I just saw them kind of get like used and abused for like different things. And I was like, I don't want that. I'm going to look at the reserves. And so before I even started my Hiring Your Heroes transition, I was in contact with a reserve recruiter, and I was thinking like, I'm just going to go like the logistics route and like stay in like a transportation unit, find one in like Maryland or Virginia and like go do that. I remember I get these contacts from my like reserve recruiter, and she's like, yeah, just call these numbers. It's sort of like cold calling, and just ask them if they have a slot. And the first like 2 numbers I called, I got like no response. And the third number I called was this like oh 06 answered, and he was like, how the bleep did you
get this number?
Why are you calling me? I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. But it's also like I'm like trying to find more information about joining the reserve, and he was just like a total asshole. And I was like, it wasn't like a representation of what it's like count me out. And I basically like hung out from that call, called the recruiter back, and was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. Like that guy was a total jerk. And she was like, she's sort of like asking me like, what do you like to do? Do you like work out? Do you like, like to like do like cycling stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I guess. She's like, well, my old unit, I know would like love to take someone like you. It's like the 450th Civil Affairs Battalion. And she's like, what do you know about Civil Affairs? Airborne, yeah. And I was like, not really anything. Like I had some friends who went to the active pipeline, and like I never saw them again until I did see them again at Fort Liberty. But so it was totally by accident that I ended up in like the world of like reserve civil affairs. Like it was not planned. It was not like I decided to do it. It was literally like, I'm an open book, send me where you want me to. And it just so happened that it like was close enough to where I was looking at living, but I was like, I'll do that.
What's your favorite thing about the civil affairs mission or your current unit or anything like that?
I would definitely say the like latitude in which you get to like execute missions, because like if you're like a team that's operating, and I learned a lot about this too, like when I went through like the career course, the fact that like you as like a captain, and yeah, you're not responsible for like a typical size company of like 120, and like thank God,
which is awesome. Yeah,
which is awesome, right? But you're given like a lot of latitude to like do something with your team, and there's no like set way to like answer the question. You kind of like figure it out, and I love having that like ability to do so. Like I love being
or even to figure out what the question is. It's almost like you figure out what the question is, and then also find the answer.
Exactly, and I love that. And I had only ever heard like all these like negative things from like active duty folks about the reserves. They're like, you really want to do that? Like everyone's gonna be out of shape and like stupid and like it's dumb. Like I wouldn't do that. It's fucking lame. Like. And I remember the first drill I showed up to, I had no idea what was going on. They were like, report to like HHC at this time. And it was like the only time, I think it's the only time I've ever gone to drill and like reported in like a PT uniform. Because I'm like coming off active duty. It'd been like 4 months since I wore a uniform. And I show up and I meet this guy who's probably mutually known in our unit. But, we had this little meeting, and then they're like, yeah, go do it. And we're like, what are we supposed to do now? And they're like, go work out or something. And so him and I go on a run, ended up running like 5 miles at like a 7-minute pace, find out that he's a collegiate running star. But yeah, so like that whole like notion of like what I thought a reservist part-time kind of person was like wrong. And I've honestly like found more high-speed people, I think, in like this unit than like I did in like any of my active duty units.
So I can tell you, I mean, the thing about the Guard and Reserve is it's very, very unit and MOS specific. So CA, you're kind of lucky because especially if it's an airborne unit, like that kind of attracts higher speed like people to begin with because they want to do that kind of stuff.
Definitely.
And I think there's a higher ASVAB requirement for civil affairs as well. So you're also not everyone who's in the unit on paper is like fairly intelligent.
They're fairly intelligent. And I would say like our unit, based on the location it's at, typically attracts people who like already have some sort of like professional career set up. And so they're not just like your high school like bums for the most part, like rolling out like not sure what's going on. They're people who like have a career, and this is something like they want to serve, they want to do something like on the weekends even. They're like, you know, go overseas, like make a difference. So I've been like really impressed with like the type of folks like we have in our unit, and like even like other units I've interacted with. Everything's not perfect, right? Like, you know, each unit kind of has its own flavor, and some like could definitely do better than others as far as Army stuff goes. But like at the same time, like this is not anyone's full-time job, right? Like we're here to like do a set number of things each weekend and then like go home.
I mean, I'm always impressed by how much we actually get done in like a 48 or like 72 hour time frame, given the fact that like we're not full time. A lot of planning has to go into that stuff. And yeah, we have some full-time people coordinating some of that, but it's kind of, I always think it's kind of a miracle that we are able to get done like the amount of stuff that we get done, which is more training than like I've heard stories on active duty, like more stuff than they'll do all year.
I can tell you, and that like that's totally the case. Like I remember going through SRP like on active duty, and it was like this whole week-long fiasco. And then like I think last October we did it in like a day, and I was like, that was like really well coordinated. Like, yeah, so like some things like I'm like some people were just better at like managing some of those resources than others. But yeah,
well, I think that's part of it, you know, because we're all for the most part adults with other priorities and careers, and it's like let's find the most efficient way to get this done with the limited time and resources that we have. So having kind of unlimited, like on active duty, when you can just keep everybody there for 18 hours a day, you're almost disincentivized to like be efficient with your time and with your people.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. Like you're required to like, and these aren't people you want to waste their time, because if you start doing that, they're going to find something else to do, because as it turns out, people in the real world like don't like to like have their time wasted.
Right. No, and like I said, I've been in a number of units, and I've seen kind of the good, the bad, and everything in between. And I found the CA community, especially if you're near like a major city, to be pretty high speed as far as the people that you get. And the mission, as you said, is pretty cool. It's kind of equivalent to being like the Army's version of like a McKinsey or a consulting firm, where it's like go in and like help this group of people like solve a problem, or you know, try to help them do better with what they're doing. And you just send in a small team of smart people to start figuring that out and developing those relationships, which is pretty cool. It's like kind of choose your own adventure type thing. And since most of the Army has no idea what civil affairs does, like you have wide autonomy to sort of do it, and then like report back to whatever commander you're supporting, being like, this is what we're doing, this is what we found out. And he'll probably be like, all right, I don't know who you are, but good job, keep doing it. So, you know, to sort of wrap this up, what have you found to be like the most challenging or most eye-opening thing about civilian life or you know, life as a part-time pipe fitter?
I mean, definitely, like, I think you can like, echo this from like any like reservist. Like, it doesn't matter like what position you're in. Like, it can be challenging, like managing, like, you know, like your full-time career. And like, I would say I have it as far as things go pretty easily. Like, our contract has us working like a pretty steady 40 hours a week. I work from home, as you can see, like most of the time. So like, that's super easy to manage. But like, even still with that, you tack on like reserve stuff, that's like dedicated time that you're doing something. Like I can definitely say how it's challenging for like a lot of people to like balance both. As far as like civilian life in general, I would say like the parallels that I've had between that and like some of my active duty experiences, my transition didn't feel like it was that challenging. And so
Do you have
that
any regrets? Do you have any regrets about not staying on active duty or doing anything differently?
No, absolutely not. I made the right decision, and like, you know, my wife and I are like super happy that like we made the decision we are at, like we did. We love where we live. We love the fact that like no one's going to tell us to move in a couple of years. And again, like we had a super easy PCS, and it was still like hard to deal with. So like kudos, and like my heart goes out to like families that like have done that multiple times and like still have to do it like across the world. So just not something that I wanted to deal with for 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Brandon, for joining us. We appreciate your insight and your service to our country. And are there any closing thoughts or remarks you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah. I have a question for you. If you were an animal, what kind would you be?
I love this question. I've gotten it a lot. And by that, I mean I've never gotten it. But I think I'd have to say that I'd probably be a Yorkie.
Why?
Because I pee when I'm nervous. And funny backstory to this question is that I actually interviewed Brandon for a job fairly recently, and I asked him this question, and his answer, he wasn't prepared for it, and I think you said you would be a greyhound. Is that correct?
I think I said a greyhound. Yeah, I think like that's the first thing that came out.
Did that question catch you off guard?
A little bit, yeah. I've never been asked that. Never been asked that in an interview.
Yeah, well, you need to prepare for that in the future because that question could come up, and you need to have a better answer than greyhound. Because as I said, I asked that question to somebody else, and he said a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And if I have a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a dog, I'm going to go with that T-Rex 9 out of 10 times.
Okay. You got to feed the T-Rex? Are you going to house it? Have you given any thought to like how you're going to take care of it? This is like...
No, I'm not a logistician. Yeah, exactly.
No, it's still serving me to this day. No, but no, I appreciate like your time and just talking to you. So, been good, man. Wish you luck with the rest of the show.
All right. Thanks, man. We will talk to you soon.